Welcome to the second Tuesday meeting of the term. It's actually the open part of Sidharth's defense. The title is Network Coding Mixing Guitar. And here is Sidharth, and he's going to speak.
I'm not going to speak just yet because I'm still waiting for one committee member. We'll wait for a few minutes and hope that Dr. Stephen will go down. In the meantime, I think we have a little bit of a pre-game show which is hopefully ready. Everyone knows what's in this. Yeah, this is.
Restore some faith in the system.
Sorry.
Okay.
Well, on your order.
Okay, turn around.
What are we saying?
I don't know. And I guess turn around again. It's just, it just happens to be an anagram of my name, so I think that's kind of anyway, so this was a bit of pre-game. Dr. Lewis here, my committee is ready. So Dr. if you want to sit here, it's, I mean, you can sit anywhere. It's just that Michelle and okay. Okay, so I think I'm going to start. Is there a clock? So I can time myself. So you can hear me, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So I'm going to just start. Hi everyone, thanks for coming for my defense presentation. My name is Sidharth Jaggi. In case you don't know who I am, maybe this is a good time for you to learn about network coding. Maybe I should also switch up the light. Does anyone know where the light switch is? Okay. As with any research, this was not done in a vacuum. I should thank lots of people, in particular my advisor at Caltech, Michelle Efros, Michael Langberg and Tracy Ho also at Caltech, Philip Chow and Kamal Jain, who were my mentors when I was interning at Microsoft, Viral Medard at MIT, and Peter Sanders, Duro Tomhazen, and Sebastian Egner in Europe, in 2 different places in Europe. So, let's start at the very beginning. It's usually a good place to start. The paper by Atswidi, Tsai, Lee and Young in 2000 defined something called network coding. The paper was Network Information Flow. It generated quite a buzz. So, for instance, in the 2 years that the network coding homepage has been up, there is a homepage maintained by Dr. Cotter at UIUC. As of last night, well actually as of last week, there were 131 papers on just over 2 years, which is a good deal. There's been network coding workshops. There's been a working group, ISIT, the International Symposium on Information Theory. This last year I had more than 4 sessions in it. There have been patents, theses. So in general, people have been busy as bees. So sure, lots of smart people are interested in it. Well, that's one reason to be interested in it, hopefully. But what is network coding? I should tell you that before I go on. And The basic idea, as Dr. Carter says on the network coding homepage, is the core notion is to allow and encourage intermediate nodes of a network to do encoding. That sounds very simplistic. It's not clear why this is a special idea, whether it has any special implications. As we'll see, it does. Hopefully, you'll at least walk away with that from the talk. Let's begin with the granddaddy of all network coding problems. The min-cut max flow theorem that Menger proved in 1927 can be stated as follows. You have a network. The network is going to consist of unit capacity edges. If the edges aren't unit capacity, you can always break them up into edges which do have unit capacity up to an epsilon array plus, and so on. So essentially, you have a graph. That's the concept. It has a pre-specified source, which is this blue node over here. It has a pre-specified sink. And the goal is to send as much information as possible from the source to the sink. Menger proved that this quantity is very closely related to something called the min cut of the graph, and that's as follows. So a cut of a graph is just a partition of the vertex set of the graph, so that one subset contains the source but not the sink, and of course the complement contains the sink and not the source. And the value of the cut is the sum of the capacities of the edges going out from the cut. So for unit capacity graphs, it's basically the number of edges going out of the cut. And Menger showed that, well, so fairly direct upper bound is on the maximum amount of information is the min cut, which is you look at all possible cuts between the source and the sink, you find the minimum value of this cut, and this is the maximum amount of information that can flow from the source to the sink. This is fairly direct because this set of edges acts as a bottleneck. You can't send more information than you could send through this set of links. To prove that you can actually achieve it, well, Ford and Fulkerson had a polynomial time algorithm in 62, and there's been much progress since then. Essentially, Ford and Fulkerson showed that you can come up with, if C is the min cut, you can come up with C edge disjoint paths from the source to the sink. So over here, for instance, you could pick up 3 edge disjoint paths from the source to the sink, and over each distinct path, you can send a different bit of information, and therefore you can achieve the min cut. Yes.
Can I ask a question? This is the first I've heard of Menger's theorem. Were Ford and Fulkerson already aware of it?
I do not know. They probably were, though they seem to be from different communities, so I'm not really sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I see. The answer is yes. Okay. In this talk, in my defense, in my thesis in general, I'm interested in the problem of multicasting. And it's stateable fairly simply as follows. You have a network, okay? So there are nodes in the network, edges and all that good stuff. There's a pre-specified set of receivers, these red nodes over here, a pre-specified set of sources. And the particular set of problems we're interested in is a set where all the sources want all the information from all the sinks. So there are no special, all the sinks want all the information from all the sources. So there are no special sinks or sources, like all the information has to go from one end of the network to the other, so to speak. In particular, we'll just look at the single source case because you can always imagine a super node which is generating all the information coming out from these sources if they're independent, which is the case we'll be interested in. What sort of problems does this capture? Well, for instance, webcasting. I was trying to webcast this thesis defense, but it turns out to be too complex a process, and I'm a theoretician. There are, well, you can also think of peer-to-peer networks. Someone has a file which they want to share. Maybe Windows wants to download its latest patch, and sensor networks, stuff like this. Let's look at some real justifications. So, this example over here will show, as we'll see, that this can actually improve the throughput of the network if you allow the interior nodes to do network coding. This example was first shown by L3D, Lee, and Young. It's been called the butterfly example because one of the early researchers saw a resemblance of this part of the subgraph to, I believe it was Michel, to a butterfly. I also like to think of it as the butterfly network because just like the butterfly effect in climate, like a small change can lead to large consequences. This example is cute enough that enough people have been motivated to look at the whole field of network coding that I think it serves a valid purpose, a useful purpose. So each edge in this network is directed downwards. It has unit capacity, and the goal is to get as much information from this blue source to these red sinks. Well, so the first and obvious thing you notice, there are just two edges going out, so the most you can hope to send through is 2 bits, right? Because each edge can carry at most 1 bit. These nodes over here, in turn, have just a single bit coming to them. The most they could hope to do is send out bit 1, replicate basically the information coming to them. The question then is, what to send down this middle link? If you send down bit 1, for instance, then the receiver 1 will get 2 copies of bit 1, which seems kind of like a waste. And since it's a symmetric network, therefore it seems like you're wasting something over there. The obvious thing pointed out, well, the nice thing pointed out by Alcide, Tsai, and Young is that if you send the binary XOR of bit 1 and bit 2, this is still a single bit. So if you send this bit down from this node, each receiver will be able to retrieve both bits. Why is this? Well, for instance, this guy over here gets bit 1 and bit 1 plus bit 2. To retrieve bit 2, he can subtract bit 1 from bit 1 plus bit 2 and he can get bit 2. He already has bit 1, right? And similarly this guy. So both receivers are now getting 2 bits, which is an improvement in throughput. As I go through the history, I'll also go through a laundry list of results, focusing mainly of course on my result. This is my defense, I hope to pass. So let's get to that. Okay, so by the way, you can construct examples where the gap can be made arbitrarily large. So there are families of networks where the capacity without coding, where if you just forward packets, is at most 2 bits per second, and the capacity with coding can be arbitrarily large depending on which network in that family you're looking at. So the gap can be made arbitrarily large. This example is due to Sanders et al. Okay, so now when you're looking at the general multicast problem, a direct upper bound for the multicast capacity, that is the maximum rate at which the source can transmit information to all the receivers, so that each receiver can decode, is bounded by the quantity I'm just going to define. So look at the source and the first sink. You can define something called the min cut between these guys, let that be C1, and so on all the way down to the kth receivers, that's CT. So the minimum of these quantities is certainly an upper bound in the multicast capacity, because there is one or more receivers which acts as a bottleneck receiver. This receiver cannot get more information than he's getting, and therefore no one else can get more information if everyone's supposed to get the same information. So this is an obvious upper bound. Alcide, Tsai, and Young showed that this is actually achievable, that there are codes, random codes over the set of all possible functions which achieve this. Then a subset of the authors, Lee, Young, and Tsai, showed that in fact linear codes suffice. Even if you restrict yourself to a much smaller set of operations, then you can still achieve the same capacity essentially. And this seems non-chronological, but it came later. The Cotter and Medard in 2001 showed that finite field linear codes suffice. What do I mean by finite field linear codes? So imagine you have lots of bits coming in. So the source in particular will take m bits at a time, bit 1 through bit m maybe, and m is a design parameter of the code. It's going to group together these m bits and consider it as an element alpha from the finite field. Once it does this, all operations in the network are going to be linear combinations of these alphas. So alpha 1 through alpha k. In this node, if there are k incoming edges, the output symbol is going to be a linear combination of the input symbols over the same finite field. And this, as I said, turns out to suffice to achieve the multicast capacity. There's a code construction in the Cotter and Medard paper, but it turns out to be exponential complexity. The first polynomial time complexity algorithm was given by myself and collaborators. So we had a polynomial time complexity algorithm which designed such codes. In particular, if the field size is t, or m, which is the logarithm of the field size, the number of bits required to describe the field, is log t, then there's a polynomial time construction. You can see that in the network parameters, the number of edges, the number of receivers, the capacity, there's a polynomial time algorithm which can actually do this. And in fact, we can also show that this block length, so to speak, the field size requirement, is tied up to a constant factor, up to a factor of half. So we can show networks for which at least half log t is required in terms of the block length. This was extended for general nonlinear codes as well by Lehman and Lehman. Okay. here's another justification: robustness and distributed design. So now suppose you have this network and you're transmitting information over it, but you know that some links are possibly more prone to failures. So maybe these links are submarine cables, and every once in a while a fishing boat goes over them and cuts one of them. So you want to be robust to a certain number of failures. So suppose one link breaks, you still want to be able to send through 2 bits of information, and it seems like you should be able to do it. And in fact you can, as this dense slide sort of indicates. So imagine you're operating with a larger finite field, maybe the one with 3 elements. You can send through bit 1 plus bit 2, bit 1 plus 2, bit 2, and bit 2. And we can convince ourselves that even if any one of these links fails, there will still be two independent sets of information coming to the receiver, and the receiver will be able to decode. Okay. The general setup for random robust codes is if this is the network, then and some links fail. So in general, the individual min cuts may reduce, and therefore the overall min cut of the graph itself may reduce. You may end up with a faulty network. As long as the source is transmitting at a rate no greater than this reduced min cut, you wish to be able to still. You wish the code still to work. That is, each interior node should be oblivious to the failures. If some of the incoming links to a network node have failed, it should still perform the same linear operation as before, just assuming that the message coming in this empty link is all zeros, and hopefully the code will still work. This is desired, and it turns out that in fact this happens. In fact, there's a fairly simple code design which does this. So if the block length is sufficiently large and you're transmitting at a rate slightly less than the capacity, it turns out to suffice to choose random linear operations at each intermediate node. It turns out that with the probability over this choice of random linear operations will be sufficient to guarantee that a code which works with a probability exponentially close to 1. Okay, this work was done independently by myself and also by Ho et al., who took it a lot further. There are different notions of linearity in this. So for instance, we have a result which we'll be hopefully presenting sometime later, where for instance, instead of doing operations over finite fields, we can instead, so look at the bits coming in, and instead of thinking of them as elements from a finite field, we can view these as just bit vectors, binary vectors over the finite field, over binary vectors in a vector space of dimension m. All we're going to do is commute these bits by some random permutation, and then add the bit vectors together over this vector space. And this is the set of random linear operations we'll be doing. It turns out that this still suffices to give us random robust code, and the advantage is that the sort of encoding complexity is significantly lower, order m instead of order n squared. The main advantage, as pointed out extensively in work by Ho et al., is that this lends itself fairly easily to decentralized design. Each node is choosing its coding operations totally independently of everyone else. These coding operations can be percolated down the network, and this allows the receivers to figure out what the decoding functions should be, and decoding can proceed from there. The one caveat is that so you're getting this decentralized code of design of codes at the cost of some exponentially small probability of error. Is this a necessary evil? Is this something you really have to live with? And it turns out that no, in fact you can do better with some cost, it is true, but you can actually do better. So I call this zero error decentralized codes, and the idea here is that suppose you have a network with no a priori topological information, there's no central controlling authority, there's no single person who can design the codes. Information can really only be percolated down the links. So every node really only sees what's happening upstream of it. You have to preserve the topological order of the network when you're transmitting information. We still want to design zero error codes which are guaranteed not to have any error in decoding. And the one additional resource we give ourselves is that each node in the network is going to have a unique identification number. That is, it's guaranteed that this node has this number and no one else does. So this could be, for instance, GPS coordinates, IP addresses, or maybe just a factory stamp or something. It turns out such codes exist. They have comparable encoding complexity to to randomly designed codes. They have, you do pay a cost of decoding complexity, but I'm not going to go into that. For this, we need to use still other types of linear code, which I haven't even mentioned yet, and this again is work in progress. So I mentioned various types of linearity so far, and I'd just like to say in passing that work done by us actually sort of quantifies what notions of linearity are meaningful when you're talking about network coding, and what the interrelationships between these things are. It turns out to be fairly intricate. Some types of codes are better for some network coding problems than others, and so on. Okay. So far I've given you a laundry list of results, which is good. It hopefully gives you some vague outline picture of stuff which I've done and which has been done in general in the community. But let's get to some meaty stuff, something which hopefully people can dig their teeth into and get something out of this talk which is at a deeper level. So let's look at the problem of security. You wish to transmit information over this network, you wish to multicast it, but there's an evil, malicious adversary hidden somewhere in the network. So he's just out to get you, really. He's eavesdropping, so he's listening on whichever links he controls. He's trying to mess you up by injecting false packets in these links. In general, bad things can happen. You'd like to be able to be resilient against such things because as we'll see, in fact, if your network codes aren't able to handle stuff like this, this could lead to really bad stuff. This is work presented at this year's ISIT. So this is the network you want to transmit information over, and we've decided, oh, network coding is good, it gives us greater throughput, greater robustness, and so on. But the problem is that there could be some evil adversary in the network, right, who's trying to mess you up. And this is worse than it looks like initially, because suppose there's only one bad guy. He's sending out these red packets, which are bad, and even some guys who are initially good, they have the hero on top of their head, are getting bad packets. So even though they're performing innocent operations, the packets going out from them are also corrupted. So in some sense, a single rotten apple can spoil the whole barrel. And this is something you really don't want to happen. You want to be able to protect your network against this. Otherwise, network coding really has no benefit. You're making things worse rather than better. To get some intuition into this, we're going to talk about fairly simple networks. Our results will be generalizable to the general multicast case, but most of our proofs will be sketched on a unicast case. That is a single transmitter, whom I'm going to call Xavier because his name starts with X, and I prefer that to Alice, is going to transmit information over a network which can be abstracted as parallel edges from the transmitter to the receiver, whose name is Yuan because the name starts with Y. So it's just a unicast case. There are parallel edges going from Xavier to Yuan. And there's an evil adversary hiding somewhere in the network. His name is Zorba, apologies to Anthony Quinn. He's really hiding. No one knows where he is except himself. Okay? And Yuan wants to get information. Here's the setup. So Xavier and Yuan first get together, they decide a code. So the code design is, of course, they know what the code is. This has to be, there has to be some prior code design. But in fact, Zorba also knows the code. He's been eavesdropping during this code design phase. So over here, X, Y, and Z basically means this information, the code, is known to Xavier, Yuan, and Zorba.
No.
Okay. At this point, Xavier then gets a message represented by the cell phone. So he knows it, of course. Yuan does not know it, otherwise there'd be no point in the problem. I mean, you wish to communicate information, right? And Zorba, so it turns out we can allow Zorba to even know this message. It turns out that the rate region achievable, even in this paradigm, is still the same as it would have been if he didn't know the rate region. So since it doesn't cost us anything, we're even going to allow Zorba, the adversary, to know this message that Xavier has. After this, he gets to choose. So he knows the code and he knows the message. He gets to choose which links he's going to sit on, and he goes and sits there, and he loses his omniscience. So no more googly eyes. He's now like a mere mortal. And at this point, Xavier gets this one additional resource that we give him. It seems like a little thing, but it turns out to have a fairly drastic implication. So Xavier has access to a private random coin. Only he can see it, no one else can see it. So certainly not U1. It's not shared randomness. So I'm not hiding anything under the rug. Nor really Zorba. It's just this little coin he has by himself. He tosses and he uses this to design his codes. So it's a code which is random just like him. And this assumption turns out to be crucial. If we don't make this assumption, then we can show that the region changes drastically and so on. Then transmission occurs. Xavier transmits information to U1 over this network. And of course, Zorba can see whatever is being transmitted on the links he controls. He cannot see what's being transmitted on the other links, nor can he influence it. He can, however, change anything on the links he controls. Okay. And hopefully, of course, at the end of this process, U1 will be able to figure out what the true message transmitted was. This is the setup. This is the chronological ordering of the code. Okay. To delve a little bit into like the actual code parameters, so there are E-directed unit capacity links. As before, we're just assuming the capacity. Each link has unit capacity. If it doesn't, we break it up into links of unit capacity. So there are E such links, and Zorba controls Z of them. So the noise parameter of interest is the fraction Z over E, right? This is the fraction of links that the evil adversary controls, and we'll phrase our results in terms of this parameter P. Xavier and U1 are fairly weak. They share no resources. For instance, they share no common random bits. They share no common randomness, which they can use to sort of hide a secret from Zorba. Zorba is computationally unbounded. He can do any computation he wants without regard to time. Maybe he's got, I don't know, God on his side, except God isn't telling him what the other messages are. Xavier and U1 can only do really simple operations. It will turn out that the operations they need to do are linear in the message length and at most, I believe, quadratic in, it depends on the setup, at most quadratic in the size of the network. Also, Zorba already knows the protocols, the codes that Xavier and U1 have designed, and he already knows almost all of Xavier's message, except, of course, the random coin which Xavier is flipping and no one else knows about, right? The goal is to transmit at a high rate, and for you want to be able to decode with high probability correctly. So let's look at some background just so we can get some understanding of what the meaning of a rate region here would be. So, well, classical information theory has begun by looking at noisy channel models. So, for instance, that was Shannon's key contribution. The binary symmetric channel is a channel where Xavier is transmitting information to U1, and with probability P, a bit is going to get flipped, like some bit. You don't really know which one. Every bit is going to get flipped with probability P or not with probability 1 minus P. And the corresponding rate region for this is 1 minus h of P. When bits are going to get flipped with probability half, as makes sense, you're going to get a rate of 0, right? A different rate model is when bits, instead of getting flipped, get erased. So now you know when something has gone wrong, and therefore you expect to get a higher rate region, right? And that's indeed the case, 1 minus P, except for really large values of P, which is a distinct rate region. So what's happening over here is now U1 is getting either a 0 or a 1, in which case she knows nothing has happened which is wrong. If she gets an erasure symbol, she knows that something has been messed up. Okay, so these are two possible things we could hope for our particular case. But we're actually looking at an adversarial model, right? We're not looking at random noise. So it seems like possibly the rate region corresponding to this should be lower. And in fact, for some models, for some adversarial models, that's indeed the case. So Hamming and Gilbert-Washmo, etc., looked at something that I and my collaborators call a limited flip adversary. So the idea is the adversary over here, Zorba, gets to see the message which is going to be transmitted. It's some n-length message. Knowing this message, he can choose which fraction P of the bits he wants to flip. He has a limited energy budget, so to speak. So of the n bits that are being transmitted, he can flip at most P of them. And U1 then gets whatever, whatever is the output of the channel, right? So in some sense, Zorba can optimize his error pattern depending on the code and the code word being transmitted. So because of this, the rate region is in fact even less than 1 minus h of P. It can be shown to be bounded away from the binary symmetric case, which is the closest random noise model, right? But and the achievable region, so there's a gap in the achievable region in the sense that no one really knows the tight the tight rate region for this. It's an open problem. It's a hard open problem. It's been open for a while. Okay, so this is some background on what rate regions we could expect for a problem. There are also other notions of channel capacities we could consider, like the transmitter and the receiver could share randomness, they could share a private key, or the adversary could be weaker by being computationally bounded or something. It turns out that the corresponding rate regions are still usually somewhere between this blue region and the 1 minus h of p. Okay. Our results will be stronger, and let's start by looking at upper bounds. So, a fairly direct upper bound is the following. So, Zorba controls fraction p of the links. I claim that a direct upper bound is 1 minus p. You can't hope to transmit more than 1 minus p of the fraction of the bits that across this network. And the reason is very simple. Well, Zorba just chooses to zero out the information in the links he controls. It lets nothing get through. He's just going to send zeros on. And even if Yuan knew which links were controlled by Zorba, which she could figure out because she's just getting zeros in them all the time, which is fairly unlikely, she can't hope to get through more information than is carried on these links, and there's only 1 minus p fraction of these links here anyway, right? So the maximum normalized capacity she could hope to get is 1 minus p. In fact, for a different part of the rate region, for a specific part of it, you can say something tighter, though it requires a bit more thought. So for instance, so we're going to look at the case when Zorba controls more than half the links. For instance, over here there are 5 links, and Zorba controls 3 of the links. In this case, he could use the following strategy. He knows the code, right? So he's going to say, okay, I'm going to choose one of these 3 links at random, maybe the middle one, and I'm going to transmit zeros in it. And on the other 2 links, I'm going to pretend to be Xavier. So I'll take some fake information and use the code that I know is being used and send some fake information. So there's really no way for Yuan to say whether these 2 links are the real Xavier or these 2 links are the real Xavier. Which links correspond to the fake information, which correspond to the real information. So this means that her probability of error is at least a half. It's therefore bounded away from 0, and therefore you can't really hope to get through. You can't hope to get through anything. Therefore, this is the rating for this part. Okay, so therefore, pretty much the only non-trivial thing to show is that if Zorba controls less than half the links in the network, you can actually achieve this. That's the non-trivial part. That's what we'll be focusing on. Just for this talk, we'll assume that Zorba is causal. This turns out not to be necessary. So it makes some sense, right? If you're transmitting information on a network, Zorba's corruption of the information on the network should be independent of what happens in the future. It should depend on only what he's seen so far. In packetized networks, this is not so clear. We can handle that too. We can handle a non-causal Zorba, and the rate region is still identical. The proofs are more intricate, and I'll show along the way how the proofs change. But we won't actually go into the details because it does get more complicated, and we won't have time. Okay, so like I said, this result can also be extended to general multicast networks. So it's the usual setup that we've seen so far. There's a network over here. There's a single source. There are multiple receivers, and each of the receivers wants to get all the information from the source. The relevant parameter over here is, instead of the number of edges in the network, it's the size of the min card. That is the bottleneck center of links. And Z. So Z doesn't have to be, Zorba doesn't have to control links in this bottleneck set of links, but it turns out that he'd do the most damage if he does indeed control links in this bottleneck set of links, which kind of makes sense, right? This is where all the action is happening. This is where information is most constrained, and if he controls links in this part of the network, then that determines the rate region. Note, I'm saying control of links only, not control of nodes, and that's because if the adversary controls a node, that's basically the same as controlling all links going out from that node. So that scenario can also be modeled by our current scenario, which is therefore more general, and that's what we'll stick with. Okay, for this more general problem, it's again the same rate region, except, like I said, the normalization changes. Instead of Z as a fraction of the number of links, it's a fraction of the number of yeah, the number of edges in the cut set. The proof is slightly more intricate. Again, we'll sketch it, but not necessarily go into details. Okay. So back to unicast encoding. Xavier over here has E minus Z bits he wishes to transmit. Can't possibly hope to transmit more because there are E links in the network, Z of which are controlled by the adversary. So at most he could get through he can get through E minus Z, right? And Z is assumed to be less than half of E. However, Xavier has no idea which of the links is controlled by the adversary. Therefore, his code should have the property that any subset, so in this case if there are 5 links, 2 are controlled by the adversary, any subset of size 3 of the links should contain enough information that the receiver can decode. Because after all, like if these 3 links are the ones uncontrolled by the adversary, then you should be able to decode the messages of these 3, and that should hold for any subset of size 3, right? It turns out that this is fairly standard. This is something called an MDS code. So what it does is, it takes a smaller message, pumps it up into a larger message, and it enables you to. It has exactly the property that you want. In particular, so we're going to clump together bits again until they're elements from a finite field. In particular, some finite field f sub q. Q is going to be a code design parameter. Then we're not going to do this just once, but we're going to take like a set of these finite field elements at a time. In particular, we're going to take n of them at a time, and n is again going to be a design parameter. So the MDS code is going to take from these E minus Z bit sources, it's going to take like these vectors, E minus Z bit like finite field vectors. It's going to multiply them with a van der Waals matrix, which corresponds to doing an MDS code. You don't have to worry about what that means if you don't know it already. But it just turns out to be easy to, like it turns out to have lower complexity encoding and decoding, which is why we use this. And it pumps it up into E vectors, from E minus Z vectors into E vectors, each of length n over the same finite field. And these E vectors have the property that every subset of size E minus Z are decodable. Okay. So if we knew which vectors are corrupted, which of these T sub E's were corrupted, T sub I's were corrupted, then we would be done because the MDS code already guarantees that. So all we, yes, question N. Good question. N is a code design parameter. I haven't told you what it is. It's something that we'll see later in the proof. It's something you should choose appropriately so that your code has appropriate rates, appropriate properties of error, and so on. N and Q are the 2 things you're going to play with: the size of the finite field and the size of the block you're going to look over. Okay. Okay, good. So the slight rate fudge factor over here. So the idea is, instead of actually transmitting at a rate 1, we're going to transmit at a rate 1 minus epsilon smaller. And the reason is because this will enable us to leave some space for a really small packet, a header packet of size n times epsilon, which can be used to decode information. Which can be, so if the adversary messes up some stuff, it'll be easy to figure out which links he's messed up, which links he's actively controlled. So let's define this particular header, because that's where the action is now in understanding how this code works. Right? Okay, so Xavier's sitting by himself, he flips this coin a few times and he gets this random symbol. It's some random symbol from the finite field, right? And the first symbol in each of the header packets is going to be this random symbol. Now each of the header packets in each of these links is going to be identical in our code design. That's for the causal version. If we were worried about a packetized network, a non-causal coding problem where the adversary could actually see all the information on this particular link before he transmits it, then in fact these choices would be different. You'd have to send different R's on each of these, and then the remaining packets would also be, like the remaining symbols would also be different from what I'm describing to you. But over here we're going to stick to the causal case, which basically means that when Zorba is messing up the initial P's in the links he controls, he doesn't know what R is, which is the whole advantage. If he does know what R is, then like I said, it gets hairier. It can still be done. Okay. Then he's going to send E other remaining symbols. E is the number of links in the network, and again the same E symbols on each of the links. How's this defined? So look at some ith link. It has some symbols being sent on this link. In particular, the ith symbol in the header is going to be a polynomial evaluated at R. Which polynomial? I'm going to look at the almost n-length vector over here. I'm going to treat the symbols from that almost n-length vector as coefficients of a polynomial of degree at most, well, slightly less than n, and I'm going to evaluate it at the value r in the finite field. So that means, like, for instance, T1 has, n times 1 minus epsilon symbols. I'm going to look at T1, the first symbol of T1 times 1, plus the second symbol of T1 times r, plus the third symbol of T1 times r square, and so on, all the way till, the last symbol of T1 times r to the n times 1 minus epsilon. So I'm evaluating this polynomial here, and this is a single symbol from the finite field. This is what I'm going to transmit in the packets, and I'm going to do this e times for each of the links, right? Okay, so this is the header information, the consistency check information, and then Xavier is just going to transmit this information over the network. Zorba, of course, gets to mess up stuff on the links he controls. He may choose not to mess up some of the stuff selectively just because it might, I don't know, confuse U1 or something. He can do anything he wants on the links he controls. Okay. What's U1's decoding rule going to be? We want something quick. It's fairly quick. First of all, she wants to figure out what the correct header packet is. How do you do this? Well, Zorba controls less than half the links, which means he can mess up less than half the links, which means since all the original packets, the header packets, these small packets that are supposed to be identical, she just chooses the majority one of them, and that's what she uses to, that's what she takes as the truth. This is the real header packet, okay? So now she already knows what the R's and the D's are supposed to be, right? The random symbol and the evaluation of this polynomial. Okay, now she also knows either the real information carrying packets or some messed up version of them. So she can still do the same computation to check whether d sub I, what she knows to be d sub I, does actually equal what she expects it to be. If it does, she's going to accept it, otherwise she's going to reject that packet. And she's going to do this operation for each of the links, so that she's going to do each such operation. So this operation is fairly simple to do, it's very low complexity. Okay, so, is that a question? No. Okay. Okay, so what are the dangers? Okay, so first of all, if the packet is uncorrupted, then certainly it's going to be accepted, right? Because it's going to pass the parity check. If it's been rejected, then it must have been messed up, because otherwise it would have passed it. But that still leaves a third case, which is it has been corrupted, but somehow it passes the parity check. That is, somehow the adversary has messed it up in a way so that it still passes the parity check. I claim that this is not going to happen fairly often. Okay, so suppose this never happens, then we are done, because you can just use the accepted T's to decode, and we already know we have enough such packets to decode because of the MDS property. As long as you have enough of these T's, you can decode the information. Okay, why is the bad case not going to happen? Why is it not going to happen that Zorba, the adversary, is going to be able to fool the receiver? Because so it's essentially like saying the difference of, so two polynomials are equal. The actual polynomial evaluated at R minus the corrupted polynomial evaluated at R equals 0. So this is basically like saying some other polynomial which Zorba has total control over equals 0, except he doesn't know where it's being evaluated, right? So this is like saying I'm going to choose a polynomial in this finite field of degree at most n. I don't know where it's being evaluated. I'm going to hope that it equals 0. The probability of this happening is at most n over q, because the degree of the polynomial is at most n. And therefore, if you choose q to be much larger than n, this is where the code design parameters come in, it's going to be, you're good. Zorba is very unlikely to mess you up. Okay. So this is a detailed proof. The remaining proofs are going to be more of sketches, but hopefully you'll still get some favors. For general multicast networks, again, the key point is really like the upper bounds are still roughly the same. You just have to restrict yourself to the min cut instead of the whole network. When
Can you turn on the volume? How did it get turned off earlier?
Oh, you can't hear me. Okay.
Thanks. Thanks. All right. Okay. I'm just curious about what happened in the non-causal case.
Oh, in the non-causal case. So let's go back. Yeah. So over here, we had R's, right? All of these are identical. The choice over here is then going to be, instead of flipping it a few times to get a single symbol, he's going to flip it many times to get different symbols on each of these links. Then the information he's going to transmit is going to be the following. He's going to transmit E square symbols over here, such that it's going to be the dot product between all of the other symbols here and the corresponding. So there are E choices for the R's and E choices for the T's. The corresponding dot products are going to be like E square in length. To check for consistency, he's then going to, so it will turn out he's going to, you can check for consistency for a small set of links very easily. This might be done slightly better offline, but the key idea is just that if you have,
is it combinatorial in the number of links?
Is it? No, it is not. So the graph could be possibly really complex, but it turns out the actual checking process is linear or quadratic. You just need to see how many checks does it pass. If it passes a certain threshold number of checks, you're going to accept it. Otherwise, you're going to reject it. Because if the link is not corrupted, then very likely it's going to pass. Then it's certainly going to pass checks with all the other uncorrupted links. And since more than half the links are uncorrupted, therefore most of those checks are going to pass. If some link is corrupted, then very likely it's not going to pass the checks with all the other uncorrupted links, and that's more than half the checks. So therefore, you are going to fail with high probability.
But how come Zorba cannot? Only Zorba can look at everything that Frege does before.
Zorba can look at everything on the links he controls, so he does not know the R's, and that's the key point. So he doesn't know where the polynomials are being evaluated.
Okay. I understand. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, good.
And those R's are not sent in each packet, no?
So that's right. So only a single R is sent in each packet, and therefore to know which the R's are eliminated. So it is a more intricate process, because then you have to build sort of this consistency graph, see which nodes are high degree, check for high degree nodes. Essentially, which nodes pass lots of consistency checks, and as long as each of these nodes pass a certain number of consistency checks, you're going to accept it, use these to decode, and so on. Any further questions? Okay. Okay, so in general multicast networks, the key idea here is you can treat the adversaries essentially as sources. Why do I say this? Because the adversary is doing something which might possibly be a function of the source symbols being sent or something, but effectively it's injecting new information into the network, right? So if you do this, then combined with, okay, so what happens? Suppose there were no adversaries, X was being transmitted at the source, and Y's were being received at the receivers. The linear combination relating the X to the Y at the receiver is known a priori, because the network code is known a priori. So you know Y sub I equals T sub I times X. But now this is adversary who's the fly in the ointment. He's trying to mess stuff up. What the effect of this is that there's some other linear combination times the adversary's injected packets, which are being superimposed on the Y sub i's. Each of these are vectors, right? So okay, so you have what you would hope to get. You have the messed up stuff. The point to note is each of these, the x's are from an r-dimensional vector space because you're transmitting at a rate r, and the adversary's things also, whatever he does, it still spans a vector space because he controls at most z such links. Therefore, the linear combination of the like if you just look at the messages on the links going out from him, that also is at most a z-dimensional vector space. So effectively, so even though it's a much more messed up network, there's no clean like edge separation over here. In principle, it's still the same. You can still use the same ideas, which is you now have sort of a r plus z dimensional space, of which R dimensions are the useful ones, Z dimensions are the messed up ones, and you'd like to be able to separate these two. It turns out that if you send okay, so with high probability over the network code design, there isn't going to be destructive interference of the adversary sources with the transmitted source, which basically is the property that the code is going to be robust. If this was a real code, if these were real sources, then you would hopefully be able to decode all of this information at the receiver if the code was known, right? So that's what this thing is. So essentially, like I said, you can abstract this away as a dimensionality problem, and you have to find the correct basis. You have to find the basis for the adversary, and if you can do that, then you can find the basis for the transmitter. But if you send some really low dimensional consistency information, as we did in the parallel edge case, and you can do this over parallel edge is going to each receiver, so with some overhead, you can actually figure out what the basis for the adversary is, and thereby subtract this out, cancel out the interference of the adversary to figure out what the transmitter's information was. Note that this doesn't mean that you can figure out where the adversary is, because for instance, if you have lots of links in like one after the other, you can't necessarily figure out which of the links is controlled by an adversary. You don't know what the effect is. Yes, I have 5 minutes left and I'm nearly done. Okay, so that's basically the stuff. Variations. Feedback. Suppose you allow noiseless feedback from the receiver to the transmitter, then in fact the rate region can be pumped up all the way to 1 minus p, and the reason is the receiver could send a key back to Xavier, and then Xavier could use this key to sign messages going to Yvonne. Zorba doesn't know what the key is, and therefore his signatures would be fake, would be verifiably fake, and therefore Yvonne can just neglect them. Variations in the knowledge of location of Zorba is also interesting. So it turns out there's an inherent asymmetry here. If Xavier knows where Zorba is sitting, he really can't do anything. He can't tell. He can't pump this rate region up any. But if Yvonne knows where Zorba is sitting, then in fact she can just throw away the packets that Zorba is trying to feed her, and she can again pump it up to 1 minus p. So there is an inherent asymmetry, and Yvonne's knowledge is stronger than Xavier's knowledge. Something I've already mentioned, because it's often asked, if all the messages, so there's no concept, hidden random key not known to anyone else, then, but only this is identical to like the higher alphabet version of the limited flip adversary model, and it's known that the rate region for this is significantly different. So note that this little random information is really important. It significantly separates the rate regions. Yeah, if there's random noise, then there's separation. So what that means is, suppose each link, in addition to possibly having an adversary, also has random noise, say statistical noise. It turns out you can separate these problems. It just means the scaling happens for each link, and it's basically a separation between channel coding and adversarial coding. Yeah, and I'm not going to dwell on this in greater detail. Let me just. I'm sorry.
A quick question on that. I'm always slow in thinking. So say Zorba can see all the links.
Yes.
Right? But you only can see them causally. You still get together the sum of bounds for the Hamming distance?
No. So in fact, if he can see them only, if he can see them only causally, then in fact it's 1 minus p truncated, because
yeah, okay. Yeah. Because then I misunderstood you. I thought you said when you see them all, then you get the Zorba's bound.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Good.
Yes.
When you can see them all, you can catch only some of them.
Yes.
But Xavier has a little bit of randomness. Is it also true that you only get kilo optimal?
Okay. So
No,
let's see how
if
to
you
answer
see
that.
all, then
So if he sees all of them causally or non-causally. Okay.
if he sees them causally, he gets the truncated 1 minus p. If he sees them non-causally, he gets the Gilbert bound.
Exactly. Because if he sees them non-causally, it is exactly the Gilbert-Marshall problem. Because it's just over a larger finite field in some sense, right? Whereas if he sees them causally, he can hide that information later and use essentially the same scheme I'd outlined earlier. use the arts later.
Yeah.
Okay. One last thing. So, suppose now Zorba, the adversary, didn't know the message that Xavier possesses. He wishes to hide it. Xavier wishes to hide the message from Zorba because, after all, Zorba is an evil eavesdropper, right? So it turns out that within this total rate of 1 minus p, you can hide a message of rate 1 minus 2p, which is information theoretically secret from Zorba. That Zorba will have no mutual information, like the mutual information between whatever Zorba can estimate and the secret message will be 0. And the idea is actually fairly simple. The upper bound is 1 minus 2p because, after all, suppose there are 5 links, Zorba controls 2. There's no way that Xavier knows which of the 5 links, which 2 of the 5 links are controlled by Zorba. Therefore, every subset of size 3 must have enough information to decode 3 bits. But within this 3 bits, you can only send 1 secret bit because two links are controlled by Zorba. So, transmitting at a rate 3, you can only send 1 secret bit. That you can achieve this is fairly direct by using something like an MDS code. So, for instance, you could send a plus b plus c, a plus 2b plus 4c, a plus 3b plus 9c, whatever. Now, looking at these 2 bits of information, there's, well, not really bits, they keep saying bits instead of symbols, but in general this is true of a finite field. There's no way, looking at these 2 symbols, that Zorba would be able to estimate, say, a. Suppose that's the symbol that you want to keep secret. Because it's a uniform superposition of these things. Okay. So, overview of the results. We talked about centralized design, which we mentioned that we came up with the first deterministic centralized design for network codes. In terms of decentralized design, we had randomized designs and deterministic designs, which had the really neat property that they were also guaranteed to be 0 error. We had lower bounds on the complexity of the network code required, and also on the encoding operations required. We indicated that there are relationships between the types of linearity one could be interested in, and then we delved at fair depth into the problem of adversaries in networks. And that is the end of my talk.
Let's thank the speakers.
I'm open for questions from everyone.
I have a small question.
Yes.
So in your when you had this unit casting, can you actually do a CRC code in each shape? Then if the guy like Windows with the data, he doesn't know what CRC code you're using, and then you will check the CRC code at the receiver.
Wait, one sec. So CRC, cyclic redundancy,
yeah.
Whatever. So okay, let's see. So if the adversary controls the link, then he could mess up the data so that it would still satisfy the CRC thing, right? Because he's being maximally bad somehow.
Yeah, if he knows the CRC code.
If he knows the CRC code, but if he doesn't know the CRC code, so one of the basic assumptions we made was that whatever's known about the code itself to Yvonne is also known to Zorba. So if Yvonne doesn't know what code was used, then she probably wouldn't be able to decode.
But in the causal case, that works fine, right?
I'm sorry?
In the causal case works fine. In the causal case, this would work fine, right? First you send the check value, then you send the data, and then you send the check function.
Oh, I see. So again, a causal adversary?
Yeah, a causal adversary. Then first you send the hash value, basically. Then you send the data, and then you send what the hash function was.
Yeah, that seems like it would make sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's exactly. Yeah, in a sense, that's what they're doing. Actually.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Yeah. So the non-causal, obviously, the non-causal case, they still do roughly the same thing, I think. But sending the hash function has to be more majority based.
Right. If you want, I can show you some slides corresponding to that. Like I can outline that in greater detail. Is maybe after these questions, if you're interested, right. I can. Okay. Are there other questions? I'd like to say that the secretaries have asked me to make sure you don't leave a mess here, so please throw your pizza stuff outside. Okay, and thanks a lot for coming.
Pizza.
It is a closed session.
Could have ordered pizza for us.
36-inch pizzas. I can ship some over. So. Oh yes, take pizza if you want.
So at this point, we'll go ahead and start the closed session for the committee only. I don't know if everyone needs a break or shall we start right in?
This room is available only till 2 o'clock. So
Okay, so no breaks. So,
this is Uday Patil and Sandhya Patil, the sort of like surrogate family. I'm really glad they could make it. So, Michelle and Pasi, my friends.
me too.
Oh, and I should probably switch this off.
No, leave it on. Oh, this is your recording it, or this is how you're telling?
This is how I'm
Oh, you're recording it. That's fine.
Yeah, 5 signatures.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.